The conference room at Cedar Bluff Senior Living smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and the particular sweetness of bad coffee left on a burner too long. And it was 10:14 on a Wednesday morning when my mother looked directly at the ombudsman and said, "I don't have another daughter." I don't know what she's talking about. I was sitting 3 feet away from her when she said it. I had heard some version of that sentence about me, secondhand, filtered through hallway conversations and admissions paperwork, for 7 years. This was the first time I'd heard her say it about someone else, in the same flat, practiced voice, and realized with a kind of falling elevator clarity that I might have heard it about myself, too, somewhere I hadn't been in the room for. But here's what my mother didn't know yet. Sitting at that laminate table with her hands folded like she was posing for a photograph, the woman she'd just erased was standing in the hallway outside that door, holding a folder 7 years thick, waiting for her cue. Welcome back to Home of Secrets. I'm Wren Castellano, 44, a medical records compliance auditor from Sacramento, California. This is the story of how my mother spent 7 years telling 2 daughters that each of us was the only one who cared, and how a stack of wire transfer receipts finally proved otherwise, in a room with a stranger in it who wasn't supposed to be moved by any of it, and was anyway. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, and if this is your first time here, subscribe, because you're going to want to see who walks through that door. Josephine and I are identical twins, born 9 minutes apart, and for the first 18 years of our lives, my mother treated that fact like an inconvenience she was managing rather than a gift she'd been given twice. I don't say that dramatically. I say it because it's accurate, and accuracy is, professionally and personally, the only thing I've ever really trusted. My mother needed one daughter to be the reliable one, and one to be the difficult one. And since we were identical, she got to choose which was which freely, the way you'd assign roles in a play where both actors happen to look the same. I got cast as reliable. Joe got cast as difficult. It didn't matter that Joe's actual grades were, for most of high school, half a point higher than mine, a 3.7 to my 3.2, because grades weren't the metric my mother used. Compliance was. I did what I was told without asking why. Joe asked why every time about everything, and my mother mistook that for defiance instead of what it actually was, which was intelligence with nowhere safe to go. There's a photograph. I still have it. It's the one object in this story that matters. So remember it, of the 2 of us at 9 years old, wearing matching half-heart charm necklaces our grandmother gave us the Christmas before she died. 2 jagged silver halves that only made a whole heart if you held them together. My mother kept mine framed on the hallway wall for over a decade. Joe's. She took out of the frame entirely sometime around Joe's sophomore year of college, after an argument I was never given the full details of, and replaced with a school photo of me instead. I didn't ask my mother to do that. I noticed it, said nothing, and let myself believe for years that Joe had simply drifted, that the distance between us was something that had happened to both of us equally, instead of something that had been engineered from one specific hallway wall. By the time we were both in our 30s, Joe lived in Denver, worked in logistics, and called our mother maybe 4 times a year. I lived 20 minutes from our mother, called her weekly, and had, without ever formally agreeing to it, become the daughter who handled things. If you've ever been the twin, the sibling, the friend who got quietly voted the responsible one in a family election you don't remember running for, stay with me, because this story is about to show you exactly how expensive that title can get, in numbers, over time. My mother's health started declining in earnest about 7 years ago. A fall, then a second fall, then a diagnosis of moderate vascular dementia that made independent living first risky, then impossible. I was the one who found the assisted living facility. I was the one who toured it, signed the initial paperwork, and started covering the gap between her modest pension and the actual monthly cost, which ran, in year 1 alone, to $2,400 out of pocket every month. Over 7 years, that number compounded, rate increases, a supplemental long-term care insurance policy I purchased for her out of my own income after her original one lapsed, a stairlift installation at her old condo before we sold it, medication copays her Medicare Advantage plan didn't fully cover. I know the total the way I know most things in my life, because I keep a ledger. It's a professional habit that bled into my personal life a long time ago, and it has never once let me down. By the time of the events in this story, I had paid, cumulatively, $187,300 toward my mother's care. I never mentioned that number to anyone. Not out of humility. I want to be honest about that. But because my mother had a specific talent for making generosity feel like an accusation if you said the dollar amount out loud in front of her. So I simply stopped saying it and let the spreadsheet hold what my voice wasn't allowed to. What I got in return, across those 7 years, was a particular flavor of quiet erasure. At her church's holiday luncheon 2 years ago, a woman I didn't know asked my mother, gesturing at me, "And this is your daughter?" And my mother said, "One of them. The one who does the paperwork stuff," in the same tone she might have described a home warranty plan. At a cousin's baby shower, she introduced me as my daughter who's very organized, which I only understood the weight of years later, once I realized that in 7 years, not once had she introduced me by anything resembling warmth. I was a function, a service she'd subscribed to. I asked about Joe occasionally, carefully, the way you ask about weather in a country you're not sure is safe to visit. My mother's answers were always some version of the same sentence, delivered with a small, satisfied sigh. You know how she is. She doesn't call. She doesn't help. It's always been you, Wren. I believed her. That's the part that still catches in my throat when I think about it now. Not that my mother lied, but that I was the exact kind of daughter who'd spent so long being told she was the only reliable one that I never once thought to check, whether the story about my sister's absence held up against anything. Real, it didn't. But I wouldn't find that out for 7 more years, and by then, the number wasn't 187,300 anymore. It was closer to double. The intake meeting at Cedar Bluff Senior Living, the skilled nursing wing my mother needed after her 3rd fall, left her unable to safely manage even assisted living, was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in April. I took the day off work. I brought her insurance cards, her medication list, her advance directive, and because I am who I am, a labeled folder with tabs. The admissions coordinator, a kind, tired-looking woman named Sandra, was walking through the standard intake questions. Emergency contacts, durable power of attorney, next of kin, when she asked, routinely, almost as an afterthought, "And do you have any other children we should have on file in case Wren isn't reachable?" My mother didn't hesitate. She didn't even look at me first. "Just put down one daughter," she said. "I don't need the other one causing problems." Sandra glanced at me, the way people glance at you when they suspect they've just witnessed something they weren't supposed to, and type something quietly into her laptop. I sat very still. I did not correct my mother in that room. I want to be honest about why. For one full disorienting minute, I genuinely could not tell whether she meant Joe would cause problems if contacted, some old grievance I still didn't understand, or whether, in some way I hadn't let myself consider, she meant that including Joe at all would complicate something my mother preferred simple. Both readings sat in my chest like stones. Neither one was comfortable. I didn't say anything for the rest of the meeting. I signed where Sandra indicated. One of the documents, slid across the table almost as an afterthought amid a stack of a dozen others, was a durable power of attorney. Prepared, my mother said, just to keep things easy, which named me sole decision-maker, financial and healthcare, and included, in small standard boilerplate text I skimmed without fully reading because I had read 40 other pages of intake paperwork by then, a line stating the principal had no other living children. I signed it. I want you to remember that. I signed a document, in a professional capacity in every other part of my life, defined by exactly the kind of scrutiny I failed to apply that morning, that legally erased my own sister, and I did it because I was tired, and because my mother had spent 44 years teaching me not to ask why. We left the facility a little after noon. My mother said, in the car, without any apparent awareness that she'd said anything at all remarkable that morning, "That went well, don't you think?" I said it did. I did not slam a door. I did not raise my voice. I drove her back to her condo, helped her inside, and drove home in complete silence, the radio off, my hands very correctly at 10 and 2, turning that one sentence over and over. I don't need the other one causing problems. I didn't confront my mother that week. I did something quieter, and I'll admit this to you plainly, something that started, at first, less as strategy and more as simple professional reflex. I opened my own ledger, the one I'd kept for 7 years, and I began cross-referencing it against her Cedar Bluff billing statement, the way I would audit any file at work, because something about that morning had put my instincts on alert in a way I couldn't yet name. The billing statement listed her account's payment history, deposits, not just my own recurring transfers, but others. A recurring wire, every month for years, from an account I didn't recognize, routed through a Denver credit union. Memo line every single time, 3 words. For Mom, Joe. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after finding that. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry, though I want to be honest that it was close. I did the only thing that has ever actually made sense to me under pressure. I built a second column in my spreadsheet, and I started reconstructing, month by month, exactly how much my sister, the one I'd been told for 7 years didn't help, had actually been sending, this entire time, without my knowledge, from 400 miles away, believing I would later learn, the exact same story about me that I'd been told about her. Total, across 7 years, $164,900. I stopped my own auto pay to Cedar Bluff's supplemental account that same night, not out of anger, but because the accounting had changed. If 2 daughters had unknowingly been fully covering this household in parallel, then one daughter unilaterally continuing to bankroll everything while the other was formally deleted from the record was no longer support. It was complicity. I am careful with that word. I use it precisely. I didn't cancel the long-term care insurance. I didn't touch my mother's medication coverage. I am not a person who punishes vulnerability, even when I'm furious at the person carrying it. What I did was simpler and, in its own way, colder. I stopped being the only name on the account. I requested, formally, through Cedar Bluff's business office, a full accounting audit of every contributing party to my mother's care, a request I was, by profession, exactly qualified to make correctly, on the correct forms, through the correct channel, leaving no ambiguity for anyone to later claim I'd acted outside proper process. I hadn't said a word to my mother yet. But apparently, Sandra's office had followed procedure and looped my mother in that an audit request had been filed, because within 4 days, my mother started telling anyone who'd listen a new version of events, that I was trying to take control of everything, that I'd always been the controlling one, that this was so typical of Wren, making a simple thing complicated. I heard this, as these things always travel, secondhand, through a cousin, through the same church acquaintance from the holiday luncheon, through Sandra herself, who mentioned, carefully, professionally, that my mother had described me to another resident's family as difficult to work with lately. I noted every version. I did not correct a single one, not to the cousin, not to the church acquaintance, not even to Sandra, beyond confirming factually that yes, I had requested an audit, and yes, I was within my rights to do so as a documented financial contributor. Instead, I built a folder. I am aware, telling you this now, how familiar this must sound if you've watched stories like mine before. The quiet accountant who documents instead of defends. I'm not going to pretend that pattern is a coincidence. People like me exist because the alternative, trying to out-argue someone who has a 30-year head start on rewriting the family narrative, has never once worked. For me, or for anyone I've ever known in this position. So I built the folder instead. My 7 years of transfers. The billing statement with the Denver wires. The power of attorney with its false no other living children clause. And eventually, screenshots of 3 separate secondhand accounts of what my mother was now telling people about me. I did not send any of it anywhere. Not yet. A folder like that isn't a weapon until you decide it needs to be one. For 9 more days, it was just a fact. Sitting quietly on my laptop, waiting. What changed everything wasn't the money. It was a voicemail. I got it on a Tuesday evening, from a number with a Denver area code I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail out of habit. Most unknown Denver calls for me were spam. But something made me answer. It was Joe. She'd called Cedar Bluff directly that afternoon. She told me, voice tight and controlled in a way that felt, disorientingly, exactly like my own, to check on a wire transfer that hadn't cleared correctly, and a billing associate, not Sandra, someone new, had told her apologetically, that she didn't appear to be listed on the account at all. "Our records show the resident has one daughter on file," the associate had said. "I'm sorry, I don't have anything under your name," Joe had assumed. She told me that this was some kind of clerical mix-up, until she called our mother directly to ask about it. And our mother, and I want you to sit with this sentence the way I had to, and told her, "I didn't think it mattered anymore, Joe. You never really wanted to be involved in the hard parts." 7 years. 7 years of Joe wiring money every single month, believing because our mother told her so, directly, repeatedly, that I wasn't really in the picture, that I distanced myself, that she was the only one carrying anything, the exact mirror of what I'd been told about her. I sat on my kitchen floor with the phone against my ear for the first 10 minutes of that call, and neither of us said very much at all because there wasn't, in that moment, an efficient way to say what needed saying. What we did instead, and this, I think, is the part of this story that actually matters most, is we started comparing dates. Her transfers against mine, her conversations against mine, within an hour, laid out plainly on a shared document I built in real time while we talked. The entire architecture of it became visible. Our mother had spent 7 years running 2 completely separate, non-overlapping fundraising campaigns, each one dependent on the other daughter believing she didn't exist. I called Sandra's supervisor the next morning, and separately, contacted an elder law attorney a colleague at the hospital recommended, a woman named Delphine Ruiz, who reviewed the power of attorney within a day and confirmed in writing what I already suspected. The no other living children clause wasn't just a factual error. In in California where we live, the misrepresentation on a POA regarding living heirs can be grounds for a formal capacity and undue influence review, particularly given documented evidence of concealed asset solicitation from a second child. Delphine's exact words, which I wrote down because I wanted to remember them precisely. "Your mother didn't just leave your sister off a form. Wren. She built a financial structure that depended on neither of you comparing notes. That's not an oversight. That's a system." Joe flew in 3 days later. I picked her up from Sacramento International at 6:40 in the evening, and I want to tell you, because it matters, that the first thing either of us did, standing at baggage claim, wasn't a speech. It was Joe reaching into her carry-on and handing me a small velvet box. Inside was her half of the heart necklace, the one our mother had removed from the hallway frame a decade earlier. Joe had kept it in a drawer the entire time. I still had mine. We held them together in the airport terminal, silver edges fitting exactly the way they had when we were 9, and neither of us said anything about it, because there wasn't anything that needed saying. We spent that night at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first found the Denver wire transfers, building the folder into something formal. Delphine helped us prepare it properly. 7 years of Joe's transfer records, notarized and organized by date. My own 7 years, already documented. The falsified power of attorney, and a written statement from Delphine outlining the legal concerns around undue influence and concealment. Total combined contribution across both daughters. Verified. $350 and $200. I requested, formally, through Cedar Bluff's administration, a mandatory family care plan conference. Standard procedure, Delphine confirmed. Whenever a documented dispute arises regarding a resident's designated decision-maker, requiring the facility's patient ombudsman to be present. I listed both Joe and myself as attending parties. I did not tell my mother Joe was coming. I want to be honest that this was a deliberate choice, not an oversight. I had watched my mother control every version of this story for 7 years by controlling who was in the room when it was told. This time, I decided who was in the room. My mother called me twice in the 2 days before the meeting, each time attempting a version of reconciliation that conveniently required no accounting of anything. "Can't we just move past this?" she said the first time. I did what I thought was simplest. The second call was less gentle. "If your sister thinks she can just show up now and act like she's owed something, after everything I've been through..." I let her finish. I said calmly, "The meeting's on Wednesday at 10. Joe will be there. I'd suggest you bring whatever explanation you have, because I've stopped being the only one asking questions." She didn't call again before Wednesday. The conference room at Cedar Bluff smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and bad coffee. And it was 10:14 on a Wednesday morning when my mother, sitting across from Patricia Yun, the facility's ombudsman, folded her hands and said with total composure, "I don't have another daughter. I don't know what she's talking about." Patricia had minutes earlier mentioned that a formal dispute had been filed regarding the resident's designated decision-maker and undisclosed family contributors. My mother's answer to that was denial, delivered exactly the way she delivered every other inconvenient fact for 44 years. Flat, certain, expecting the room to simply absorb it as truth because she'd said it with enough confidence, let the silence sit for exactly as long as it took to open the door. Joe walked in holding a folder 7 years, thick, notarized transfer records, bank statements, Delphine's written legal summary, and set it without a word, directly in front of our mother on the laminate table. I have never, in 44 years, seen my mother's face do what it did in that moment. It wasn't shock exactly. It was closer to recalculation, the visible, real-time collapse of a system that had run smoothly precisely because its two load-bearing pillars had never once been allowed to stand in the same room. 214 wire transfers, Joe said, her voice as level as mine, because apparently that particular gift runs in the family regardless of which twin got cast as difficult. Every single one memo-tagged for Mom. Every single one sent, because you told me Wren wasn't in the picture. Would you like to explain that to Patricia, or should I? My mother's hands, still folded on the table, began to tremble slightly, which was the closest thing to an admission I had ever watched her make. "I didn't want either of you to feel burdened alone," she said, which was, I noted, technically true and completely dishonest at the same time. A sentence built to sound like protection while functioning as extraction. "You didn't want us burdened alone," I said. "You wanted us burdened separately, so neither of us would ever add it up." Patricia, to her enormous credit, did not rush to fill the silence that followed. She let it hold, the way a good professional does when the room needs to feel the weight of something before anyone moves past it. Then my mother did the thing I think on some level I'd been waiting 7 years for her to do. She looked at Joe, not at me, and said quietly, the one true sentence I'd hear from her in this entire story. "I told the intake office you didn't have a sibling on file, because I didn't think either of you would ever find out about the other one. It was easier that way. For me. Not for us. Not for the family, for her. 7 years of engineered isolation, condensed into 2 honest words she'd probably never intended to say out loud." Patricia formally flagged the durable power of attorney for review that same week. And within a month, following Delphine's petition, the court replaced it with a joint healthcare and financial proxy naming both Joe and me as co-agents, requiring shared consent on all major decisions going forward. The exact arrangement our mother had spent 7 years and $350,200 preventing Cedar Bluff's business office, issued a formal correction to the family contact record. Joe's name went back on file not as an afterthought, but as a listed daughter, first line, no qualifiers. My mother did not face criminal charges. Delphine was clear early on that manipulation, however deliberate, isn't the same as prosecutable fraud when the money was, in fact, spent on her actual care, rather than diverted elsewhere. But she lost something she'd spent 7 years protecting more carefully than any bank account: the ability to control which version of the story either of her daughters believed. The church acquaintance who'd been told I was difficult lately eventually heard the real account, from Joe, at a family gathering neither of us expected to attend together again so soon. My mother stopped bringing up the topic entirely, which, from a woman who'd never once in my life failed to have an opinion, was its own quiet confession. Joe and I split the remaining monthly gap in her care evenly going forward. On paper, formally, with both our names on the account. Not because either of us needed the accounting to feel loved, but because we'd learned, the hard way, exactly what happens to a family when nobody's allowed to compare numbers. I had the necklace repaired. Not replaced, repaired. A jeweler near my office reset both halves onto a single chain, heart whole for the first time since we were children, and gave it to Joe for her birthday that October. She wears it now. I wear the matching one. Neither of us needed to say what it meant. We'd already spent an entire lifetime being told, separately, that we were the only one who mattered. We know better now. A year later, Joe flies in for our mother's care conferences with me twice a year, and we grab dinner together every time, just the two of us, at a small Italian place near Cedar Bluff that has nothing to do with our mother at all. We talk about ordinary things now, her job, my job, a vacation we're finally planning together for the first time in over a decade. Our mother is stable, cared for, and for what it's worth, has never again told a single person in that building that she has only one daughter. I think about that intake meeting sometimes, the exact sentence, "I don't need the other one causing problems." And I understand now that my mother wasn't protecting anyone from problems. She was protecting a system that only worked in the dark. The paperwork was never the threat. It was just the light. If you've ever been told you were the only one who cared, while someone you loved was being told the exact same lie about you, in reverse, from 400 miles away, I want you to hear this clearly. Check the ledger. Compare the dates. The truth is usually sitting in a folder somewhere, waiting for two people to finally sit down at the same table. Family isn't the people who decide which of you gets to exist on the paperwork. It's the people who show up anyway, folder in hand, and put the whole story back together. If this one hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Tell me in the comments what you'd have done in Wren's position. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe to Home of Secrets. I'll see you in the next one.